Welcome, everybody. Hope you had a pleasant and energizing break. So let's begin. I will just briefly introduce myself, and I will use my opportunity to speak. For a couple of minutes, maybe, to introduce the topic. My name is Vujo Ilić. I'm a political scientist from the University of Belgrade, but for many years I was associated with CRTA. And it's always wonderful to have these conferences where people from academia and practitioners come together. I find them much more entertaining and much more useful than purely academic conferences. But being what I am, I will just start with a little academic introduction, if you don't mind. There was an issue of a Journal of Democracy back in 2002. Journal of Democracy is one of the leading publications in the theory and practice of democracy, part of the National Endowment for Democracy, and it was called Elections Without Democracy. It was already mentioned today a couple of times, actually. There were two articles in this journal, standing one next to each other. One of them is about the rise of competitive authoritarianism. It was authored by Stephen Levitsky and Luca Way, and they were basically telling us that there are these new type of regimes which combine democratic institutions as the principal means of obtaining and exercising political power, but at the same time that the incumbents violate those rules so often and so much that the regime fails to meet the minimal standards for democracy. And so they were telling us basically back then, based on the experiences of the 1990s, that these hybrid regimes are not transitory, they're stable, they're here to stay, and yes, we see them staying. But they're also saying that these are not democracies, but competitive authoritarianism. And a hat tip to Francesco for pointing that out, and it was one of the things that really did deserve an applause. But there was another article that I would like to focus. It was called Menu of Manipulation by Andreas Schedler, and he was warning us of another thing. He was warning us that we kind of forgot that elections have always been a means of democratic governments as much as an instrument of authoritarian control. And he was basically giving us the menu of how the authoritarians control these democratic processes. And he listed 14 most common items on the menu. And of course, the menu evolves, right? The menu of manipulation doesn't stay the same. It looks to me now more like a bag of tricks rather than a listed menu, because you can see what's on the menu. But if you have a bag of tricks, you never know what's going to be employed. And one of these advances in the instrumentarium happened in Serbia in 2023 and basically motivated this panel to a large degree. Let me just tell you a couple of words about it, and then we can continue the discussion with our panelists. What happened is that, you know, as election observers, I think you're always exposed to accusations of mass organized fraud. But I think intuition or the logic that usually holds is that for systemic fraud, always leaves traces. And it's very difficult to imagine that there is a mass organized fraud without a trace. And the more people have to know about the fraud in order for it to work, the more information will leak. And in the months before the last elections, it wasn't leaking, it was flooding. Basically, CRTA could see in September, October, November, December, multiple instances of anecdotal evidence following the pattern that were pointing into two major directions. There were elections in Belgrade, local elections, which were highly contested. It was very tight expectation of who will prevail. And then what happened is that we were seeing voters with residences in other constituencies being registered in Belgrade to be able to vote in this election, for one. And the other thing that was happening is that voters with formal residences in Belgrade, who otherwise live elsewhere, including other countries, were driven to Belgrade to vote in this election. And CRTA was collecting the pieces of puzzles, observing irregularities at the polling stations, but what was novel about it was the scope of involvement of individuals from different levels of state institutions. This is what really was a big surprise for us, that we couldn't really anticipate. But as election observation organization, you can do as much. You can file a report, and you can file criminal charges, but that's where the agency of election observers stopped. We also had a problem of how to call it. So in other places it was called election or voting tourism. We thought like, this sounds too nice, like everybody likes tourism. So, but this is something criminal. We shouldn't really call it tourism. Also, we could call it busing, but it's not only busing. It was something else. And we called it organized movement of or migration of voters. And today we will discuss the organized migration of voters, but not only that. We will discuss different authoritarian innovations, which are basically serving them to give them this additional edge in elections. And also, these do not happen only in Serbia. We knew that they were happening in the region, but we were, seeing it for the first time. As Sofia mentioned earlier, like, other irregularities also existed, such as gerrymandering. This was not present in Serbia, but we could see other instances. And today at the panel, we have four panelists that I will just briefly introduce, but feel free to introduce yourself to more if you need. That can talk about the practice of electoral engineering. So one of them is Cyril Kulenović. He's an election and political expert who works at the International Organization for the Francophonie and specializes in civil and electoral registers implementation, maintenance, and audit. So thank you, Cyril, for being here. Then Dario Jovanović from the Center for Civic Initiatives, one of the leading civil society organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and which is a member of Podlupom, a coalition of CSOs that observe elections. Then Zlatko Vujović, who will join us online from Georgia, where he is in the Election Observation Mission. He is an executive director of the European Network of Election Monitoring Organizations, NMO, and among other election observation roles is affiliated with the Center for Monitoring and Research, CEMI, in Montenegro. And last but not least, Zsuzsanna Kunos, Political Freedom Program Officer from Hungarian Civil Liberties Unions, where she specializes in election rights, as well as assembly rights and freedom of expression. So we can cover this issue from different angles and from different regions. And for one, let's try to identify the problem. I will first ask Cyril. So I already mentioned that voters often shift between or within electoral districts, and this causes different issues, different problems, such as fictive or multiple voter registrations. Can you start by elaborating on these challenges and their impact on electoral integrity?
Yeah, sure. Just before, I want to make it clear, Vujo, I'd like to apologize because my name is Cyril Kulenović, but I don't speak Serbian. I sent it back to Kulinban areas. I don't remember anything. Second of all, I'd like to apologize because it's my first time in Serbia, and I don't know the context in Serbia. And I will not speak about Serbia for a second. It's not my point here.
I think I spoke enough. So
exactly.
I think everybody will agree with that.
Also, I want to apologize because I'm a technician, right? I'm working for electoral commissions, I'm embedded, I'm auditing voter registers, and I'm working on voter registration and civil registries. So I'm not here on the civil society vision of the problem, but also from the EMB point of view. So I already apologize. And I also apologize because I love examples. Simply because we all believe that we are alone going through these issues. Every country is going through these issues. They all have different tools to work on them, to deter them, and to forbid them. But every country, every single country has this issue. I'm from France. I was in charge of elections in France and went through technical difficulties and frauds. The same in Africa, the same here, same everywhere. So it's not a question about Serbia, it's a question about how we as electoral commissions, can we deter that, how can we work? So Vujo, to come back to your point, the first roundtable was about identifying the problems. Where are the roots? Which are the causes leading to voters' migrations, to duplicates, to different potential frauds, electoral frauds? First of all, let me be clear, from the technical point of view, there are numerous causes. You cannot say when you observe an election, it's all frauded, it's all the government. Yes, it can be, but causes are from everywhere. When you are inside the Electoral Commission, you have technical issues to deal with. Voter registers are small registers combined in a big one, mirroring to keep up the data updated. Coming back, it's a perpetual movement of data. So first of all, we have technical issues to deal with as electoral commission. So part of the problem is this one. One of the other causes is political. Electoral commissions work for politicians. Political decisions are taken, which impose to the electoral commission to take decisions and actions. And sometimes they face difficulties to implement the political decision. I'll come back on that. Then you also have political interventions in the system. You have local politicians. We can have impact on your voter register because they were asking people to come and vote register here. You have the hand on these people. You cannot control everything. So it's something you have to watch, you have to deter, and you have to fight. But it comes from everywhere, to be honest, from everywhere. Also, individuals can decide to register in another place. They can decide to move because economically they want to come to the capital and they want to change their registration, their address, by force sometimes because they just arrived. So causes and sources are from everywhere. Yes, they can be political, but they can also be technical. They can be individual, they can be national, they can be very localized. It's very complicated sometimes from the observer point of view to deter them. First of all, in terms of voters' migrations, because that's what you are talking about, constituency mapping is one source. There are many sources, but constituency mapping is also a problem. People need to feel represented. When you are living in a place, you need to feel represented to go and register, to go and vote. You go and register and vote where you feel belonging to a community. So mapping is something essential, and we always forget it. Thresholds is one example. Do you organize your voter register, your electorate, by number of voters registered? Do you organize your constituency by number of people living there? It's absolutely different, and it can cause major migrations. And also, what is the representativity? What are the boundaries? Where are the boundaries? And most important, I would say, where are people living? Where are the living catchment areas? And that's very important. That's what we face with some local politicians, for example. If you are registered in one place, but your family, political family, or your center of life is somewhere else, of course you'll be tempted to go there. And that's the link between political action, interference, and individual interference, because you need to feel represented. I just want to give you some example about this, how to build boundaries and to keep people together. Because you have countries where you have historical districts. You live in a district which will never change. You can live in countries where your constituency will change depending on the thresholds, number of voters or people living there. And that's a fundamental problem for gerrymandering. I'm looking at the American colleagues, but gerrymandering can be also a problem. And it's a cause of population movements too. So it's a political choice or historical choice or technical choice with thresholds. Is very complicated, but it has to be considered before speaking about migrations. You need to speak first about that before going to migrations. I'll just give you, in terms of impact of distribution of the electorate, how it can be complicated for us as electoral commissions. I will take the French case, for example. 2008, France decided to create members of the parliament representing the French living abroad. Okay, that's fine. So it's new constituencies, okay? But French people were used to be still registered in their location in France, where they were born or where they grew up. Mm-hmm. They could have just arrived in the country, or maybe were born in Serbia, for example, but were still French. And it was very difficult, as an example, for the French administration to organize it, because they had to delete all the duplicates of French living abroad also being registered in France. And we speak about 1.5 million people. I remember when I was working at that time in the French administration, we had to spend nights with colleagues deleting people on papers because voter lists were already printed. And a few hours before the election, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we were still crossing people out. And on election day, people came and said, I want to vote. And as president of the commission, I had to go there and tell them, you cannot vote because you were officially registered in Serbia as a consulate. So I had to delete you somewhere. You cannot be a duplicate, so I had to make a choice. We had to make a choice. It's an example, but it's how boundaries, territories impact your location. When I was speaking about funding the electoral population on the census data or on the number of voter registers, it's a very important difference. You know all these examples, but Lebanon is an example. They are still stuck, for example, on their political system on 1932 census data, because no one wants to touch to the distribution and the representation of the population. It was the same in France also. Sorry to come back to France. But New Caledonia was also a problem when you had to go for a referendum and ask people who will vote. People who just arrived or real Caledonians? Who is a real Caledonians? Where is the threshold? Who can be registered? Who can vote or not? It's very complicated. For example, they fixed a limit there, and they still have a problem because they stopped in 2007 registration. People living there for now nearly 20 years cannot register and vote for the referendum. Another issue is out of constituency registration. As a voter, I will not register in my constituency and go and register in another one, or I will register in both. It is very complicated for the electoral administration to identify the duplicates and to deduplicate, depending also if they have an alphanumerical voter register or if they have an alphanumerical and biometric register. And it also makes a difference. You can go and audit, for example, a register and identify if you have shortcomings in the data collected on each of you. But if I don't have biometrical data, it's very hard for me to tell me if you are a duplicate, if you registered here, here, and here. So it's also a question which have to be addressed, and it's also part of the problem. I'll give you one example again, DRC, Congo. It's a very good example, because they are maybe one of the most advanced countries in the world on deduplication and data. There are 46 million voters registered. So it's not a simple little example. It's a huge example. DRC, when we've done the audit, for example, 6 million duplicates were identified, 6 million. It just gives you an idea of the volume. 6 million duplicates. How do you deal with it? Yourself, how do you deal with 6 million duplicates? Do you cancel the registration system? Do you redo it? No. The work was to identify where you had political pressure which led to duplicates. This was the case of Sankuru, for example, which is a region where we had to delete 50% of the electorate. 43% of the electorate was deleted, simply because there were people from another area where political leaders paid them organized buses to come and register in their area to be sure to win. So you have to take decisions also. You have to delete these people. But how do you delete them? How legal tools do you have to delete them? It's not an easy question. Also, finally, sorry, to speak about this definition of electoral population. Some countries, for example, integrate into their electoral law the threshold, but sometimes the constituencies and the number of people in each constituency or voters registered. Finally, the proof of residence. That's the problem. Proof of residence. I always hear about the proof of residence. And this is the case we had in the RC, but that they have in the US, and that they have in Australia. If you don't attach a real, authentic proof of residence to the registration, how can you control that this electorate didn't have a real proof of residence? How can you say that? If you just write, it declares that the address is 1 Boulevard Kulenović, how can you justify that he is not eligible to go and vote? So all these technical questions have an impact. This is why the US changed their system, because the US, the Americans, have a huge problem. They are states, and they don't communicate together. So it's only since 2012 that they implemented a system to try to identify the duplicates. Through the vehicle numbers, they created a national vehicle number and a postal system number to see if people change their address with delivery system. You know, when you make a request on Amazon, you are flagged. If you order something on Amazon, you are flagged with your new address. This is the way Americans try to deter duplicates and to work on the database. And it's a permanent work. It's not a one-shot work. It's everyday work to cross-check data and to delete these people. Australia did it also, but they did it also with another system, with the GIS system, and now, which is leading authority in charge of the audit, worked on GIS system on each registration area to identify where people were coming from originally and how they were moving years after years on the territory. Finally, vote by delegation and voting by proxy is always an issue. Is always an issue in all countries. Now I'm working in Guinea for the last 3 years. I'm working within the government to build a civil registry, which is something else, but will be the base for a next voter registry, biometric one. And they have the same issue, proxy voting and derogations for people observing, for example, on election day. You can be authorized to vote in another area on election day because you are observing, for example. And that's a derogation. Or you can organize a proxy voting. You can delegate someone to vote for you in your polling station. It's very complicated then to how can I say, take apart this electoral population and this population. What I just want you to understand is that all these causes are coming together, and that's why a daily work has to be done on this, but also from the really beginning, on the mapping of constituencies, on the law, on the thresholds, on detailing how things will work. Before, after that, you will have to deal with all these duplicates and all these people. And sometime in some countries, it was the case in Burkina Faso, for example, we had a big question during the audit of the voter register. Do we have to throw to the rubbish bin the voter register? Or are we able to clean it? And it's always the question. Can we clean these duplicates? Or we have to relaunch everything? Mm-hmm. And that will be also the end of the question to you. How do you deal with that? It's easy always to speak about frauds, duplicates, voters, migration, but how do you deal with it? You will maybe answer to that.
We will have plenty of time to talk about that. Thank you for your input. I really like the point that when we talk about these technical administrative issues, it always has repercussions on enfranchisement of voters. So it looks like this is an administrative decision, administrative choice, but real people are losing or getting voting rights through these decisions. And so I will also like to hear Dario's feedback regarding proof of residence, because I think it's very pertinent to Bosnian case. But let's turn to these choices that are being made about, either constituency boundaries changing or voters or people moving. And I would like actually Zsuzsanna to talk about this. So Hungarian government has made a lot of electoral changes in recent years that have to do with all of these issues that we talked about so far. Can you tell us more about this?
Oh, yes, thank you. And thank you again for your invitation. First of all, a couple of words about where I came from. I'm from the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, and what we do is mostly providing legal aid and operating a hotline at elections, and people are contacting us with their problems. So that's how we know what's happening, because people are getting to us and they say what they saw and they say what their problems are. And about Hungary, a couple of words. most of you probably know, but I need to highlight that in Hungary, the governing party has a 2/3 majority for 14 years now. This means that a 2/3 majority is sufficient enough to change basically any kind of rules you want to change. Even the constitution, all of the electoral laws, and things like that. So if the government's will is to change something, then they change it. And this is what we saw in the last 14 years. There were no 2 consecutive elections where nothing was changed. So I could make a long list about these election changes, but just to highlight one recent and an important one to give you kind of look what is the scale of this. We used to have the local governmental elections during October in every 5 years. This was also in the constitution. But last year, the government thought that it would be way better for the government to hold the elections on the same day as the European parliamentary elections. So they changed the date of the local governmental elections, which meant that this date was half a year earlier than it should have been. So those people who got elected for 5 years could spend their mandate for 4.5 years, and then the elections happened. They remained in force for half a year, but most of them were changed in the springtime. Not most of them, but a lot of them was changed in the springtime. So I think this gives you a quite good overlook about what the scale of this election engineering is. And about the voters' migration and what you've just talked about, in Hungary, basically what you've mentioned, that something looks like an administrative change, but it has a huge impact. In 2021, there was a change which looked like an administrative change, where they changed what an address means in the Hungarian law. And it now doesn't need to be somewhere you actually live. You don't have to prove that you live there. Then you can say that this is your address, which has a quite significant aspect, meaning that you can have an address somewhere you want to vote. So it has a huge impact on voters' migration as well. This happened in 2021, and it's still in force. So the 2022 elections, the national elections, and also these 2024 local governmental and European parliamentary elections combined happened in the sense that they could do that. So basically, my key point is that in Hungary, of course, there are election frauds. There are election frauds everywhere. So people are using buses to take voters to the voting polls, to the polling stations. Also, there are people who try to buy votes. This happens everywhere. But interestingly, in Hungary, most frauds and the biggest frauds are legal, because they have the ability to change the legal regulation before they do the fraud. So election engineering is happening in a sense that it is completely legal, and you really have to take a closer look to understand that in Hungary, it's not the thing. The thing is not that someone breaks the law. The whole system is broken. I will continue on the next one. That's my key point.
This is a powerful statement. Thank you. So let's move to Bosnia, actually, because I think for 2 reasons. So one of these issues, especially like postal voting, was a big issue in Bosnia. Also, there were instances of voter migration at the local level mostly. But so from your perspective as electoral observation organization, how do these irregularities fit the bigger picture of the quality or electoral integrity in Bosnia?
Yeah, this may sound strange, but I think that we at the election issue conference slowly can conclude that elections are not the biggest problem of our countries. So I think that biggest problem of my country, and when I say our countries, I mean on the Western Balkans, because we still feel it as our countries, is corruption. And this corruption is systemic corruption. This corruption created the state capture phenomena. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, it literally looks like that nobody gets employed in public sector without party affiliation, family affiliation, or paying bribe for it. This creates that institutions who should be independent, who should be professional, are not, that their decisions are not in favor of citizens, but in favor of political parties and party leaders. And this creates general distrust, not only of citizens in their government, in their country, and in their institutions, but also among political parties in each other, yeah? Because any decision from the Constitutional Court to the school board is challenged, because everybody pinpoint that there's a party person who actually made the decision in favor of some political party. And this is really devastating for the society as a whole. This creates something that we call impunity culture. There is no consequence for your misconduct. There is no sanction for violation of law if you are close to the political parties. I don't know whether this is the case in Serbia, but we can discuss it. Yeah. So, my biggest fear about all of this is that one of the biggest consequences in my country is the brain drain. And it is third biggest brain drain worldwide of the young, well-educated people who are leaving the country. Just after Venezuela and Haiti by some assessments, yeah. And as those people go, which are potential for change, the more and more population and more voters is covered by this corrupt mechanism, by these clientelistic networks. And I think this actually fits their agenda. Whatever they speak publicly, that they want to stop this, they don't want. They want to stay, if it is possible, with all people being part of their apparatus without critical voices and with putting a target on the foreheads of those critical voices, yeah? And when we have this situation, and this type of oppression, then my biggest fear is that you end up with something that in our languages we call theater in house, theater in a home, where everybody acts their roles and it just contributes to the status quo. Government acts as government, opposition acts as opposition, international community acts as international community, and civil society acts as civil society. Everybody are around. Red circle, but nobody crosses. Nobody questions, nobody challenges status quo. And I think we should, when we speak of any issue, including elections, look at from the standpoint that it is directly tangible consequence of the corruption. And this is answer to your question about maybe bigger picture, that we are facing. Of course, when we go below, something that I have learned from these previous 10 years of working in elections is more or less the wisdom. If there is a smoke, there is a fire. So nobody speaks of vote buying in Sweden. But in our countries, when somebody speaks about vote buying, and if it is repetitive, and if you have it from the multiple sources, it's usually confirmed. It is just a question of time. And we do divide all of these type of irregularities basically into two basic divisions, before the election day, on the election day. And many would say that the focus of election irregularities is moving from the election day because it become too obvious to steal elections on the election day in period before the election day. And I would agree with it, but I would also argue that these type of irregularities still exist. And I will try to summarize, yeah? So in period before the election day, we have a massive manipulations which have direct impact on the election results. And I'm speaking of abuse of state resources as an example. And multiple pragmatic ways how it's practiced, from using state-owned enterprises in order to pressure employees who to vote for, from having the social benefit system, which is given only to those who promise to vote for, from using the public institution spaces for the promotion of the party people on the list, from giving budgetary money in the specific period for the specific categories, which is some type of illegal vote buying, yeah, or vote buying through budget. But also other types of irregularities, yeah, like functional campaigning, which is something that everybody who is coming into race from the position of government is misusing, which gives them a clear advantage into the race. And the whole concept of the free and fair elections is about the same starting position and the same position to the election day for all those participating in elections. Voter pressuring that have many forms. Hate speech as a dominant political speech in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, to the voters list and problems with the migrations and the voters list in general. And then I come to the election day, and it is possible to influence elections outcome on the election day. And it happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2022. We had recounting for the president and vice presidents of the Republika Srpska entity for whole 2,300 polling stations. What we have done is that we took first results counted in the polling station level and followed recounting in the main counting center. We managed to follow 660 polling stations when the CC decided to move the results, which were publicized. We asked for those results in any format, it was not allowed to us. We asked to take copies of the results, original results, which are in the main counting center, they were not allowed to us. But we did manage to do election forensics based on these 660 polling stations. It's 1/3 of the total polling stations. And we saw, for example, that at 2/3 of the polling stations, results differ. At 1/3, up to 3 votes, in 1/3, more than 3 votes. We had more than 10 votes difference at 111 polling stations, every 5th of them. When we went deeper, we saw that 82% of those votes was manipulated in favor of Milorad Dodik as a candidate, 14% in favor of Jelena Trivić as a candidate, and 4% in favor of vice presidents from the Croat Catholic and Bosniak Muslim community. This 4% changed the outcome in one race. When we first counted results, the one guy won for the vice president of Republika Srpska, Bratić, and when we recounted it, another guy for the vice president won, which is Duraković. When we go deeper and see how they manipulated, we see that every place where Dodik was manipulating has a clear pattern. He was taking Jelena Trivić votes and adding these votes to himself. Wherever Jelena Trivić manipulated, she would just add her votes to herself, not touching his votes, yeah? And this is something that you can do, that can trigger deeper investigation. And to summarize, the most conservative projection is 3.68. 3.68% that it is stolen this way in favor of Milorad Dodik, and the difference between candidates was a bit more than 4%. So misusing unused ballots, voting instead of another person, is still happening. Adding votes for the specific political parties or preferential votes, we have also open list system, yeah, so-called open list system, or invalidating ballots for the political opponents can create a difference and can decide the outcome of the election results. Hopefully, I think we are heading in a good direction with the new technologies and everything that we piloted in these most recent elections that were happening at 6 October, but I can maybe replicate on this.
Exactly.
Reflect on this.
Exactly. Thanks for making this point. We tend to say more and more that electoral fraud is not happening at the election day, but it's like what matters really is what happens before the election day. But your point is great. I mean, it's not so important unless until it becomes important. And then if we are not prepared as election observers to actually identify it, to report it, then we might be going back to the good old days of electoral fraud that we think are in the past. Thanks. We'll go back to some of these issues later, and I'd like to include Zlatko Vujović, who is online with us now. So Zlatko, you've been observing elections in Montenegro for many years and as part of NMO mission in other countries such as Georgia, where you are now. I'd like to ask you, what common issues have you identified regarding these electoral manipulations that we talked about so far, especially organized migration of voters, and how have these experiences shaped your approach in election observation? And if you could just unmute, yes. Great.
From my perspective, it looks like someone prepared the handbook how to rig elections based on experiences from ex-Soviet countries, and then it is implemented in the Western Balkans. And that what was happening in the post-Soviet countries in the last, let's say, 1 decade, 2 decades, now in the last 5 to 6 years is somehow in very extensive way implemented in the Western Balkan countries. So I don't know, is it with the purpose? Did really someone explore and develop the new practices in the Western Balkans, or it is just by occasion? I really believe that there is a systematic way that is happen in the Western Balkans, but it's happening. And when we are talking about Basen or organized migration of the voters, that is something that already been identified in some countries like Moldova. They have the case of the Transnistria, Pridnestrovye, the part of the Moldova under the control of the Russian forces, let's say like that, one of the frozen countries of conflicts. And actually, they have Moldovan citizenships, and they are moved, organized by the one party supported by the Russia Socialist Party and other parties also supported by the Russia. And those voters are coming and voting another political party. They don't have right and opportunity to campaign in the part of the Transnistria. And this sometimes it is had a very significant impact, still has. But with some other, you saw the last results of the elections in the Moldova, and also about the referendum. They are really, the country is very polarized. The situation is very difficult, and those kind of the voters had a very high impact. Also, we previously in Georgia, we were witnessing the same kind of the situations. Especially this is very present in the community where there is a lot of where the national minorities are dominated, and there is a lot of the people who move to work or live abroad. So there is also proxy voting in that case, the busing, etc. So now we are facing the similar problem in the Western Balkans. And it is this problem now, I would say, especially after great job that CERTA did in following those cases and making explaining what was happening on the local elections in Serbia, in Belgrade, in other cities. Now everything is much more visible. But before that, Semi tracked some changes in the voter registry, because there is a big difference comparing the domestic observers and the right to observe voter registry in Montenegro and some other countries. For example, our observers, registered observers, have right to access to the voter registry in Montenegro. So we really can get information and data from there. So what we did, in one municipality, that we had the right to follow the voter registry and check, conduct the controls in the municipality of Herceg-Novi. There were local elections, and we actually compared those data with the data from the voter registry in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the final result was of that assessment was that 10.54% of the voters were already registered in the voter registry in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that means that it's a huge number. we had even 82 of them who were registered in 3 countries, and they had the right to vote in Bosnia, in Montenegro, and in Republic of Serbia. So they had 3 citizenship, and they had also 3 permanent residency. The permanent residence is very important not only because of the voting rights, but also it is important because of the taxation. You are differently, for example, if you have the house in all three municipalities in 3 different countries, then you are going to be differently, those real estate would be defined taxation from the district. For example, if you live in that house, your taxes will be lower. But if this is, a house to rent during the summer, the tax would be much higher. So the people are motivated to be registered in different, to have the permanent residence in different countries or citizenship from different reasons. It's not always the electoral fraud. Sometimes it's right to access to education, access to the health rights in the different countries. Better, for example, a lot of people are motivated. There is the better health service in, for example, in Serbia than maybe in Montenegro. So there could be a motivation. But the problem is not because sometimes the people are registering the 2-voter registry. The problem becomes huge when there is the organized attempt to abuse those people and force them to vote in favor of one political parties. And this is something that happened in Serbia on the local election, but this is a constant problem in Montenegro because there is a huge mobility or migration of those voters in elections from Serbia, from Republika Srpska, part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are facing the problem. First, we raised that issue in Montenegro. Certainly raised that issue in the Serbia. And I heard also now in Bosnia and Herzegovina, after the local election, the opposition was claiming that voters from Montenegro and Serbia influenced the final outcome of elections. I read the information about Trebinje. So this is all possible, and we somehow need to stop that because if not, the integrity of electoral process and results wouldn't exist anymore. So, for example, I will just share with you some information. Montenegro had a census, finally had the census, and the results were published. And there are 90,000 more people in voter registry, voters, than those who are registered in the census. They are adult. So older than 18 years. So 90,000 more in the voter registry than in the census. So there is this huge discrepancy between the voter registry and the other data, partially due to this problem of double registration because people, they don't live, but they still are registered having the permanent residency in Montenegro in this case. So we also compare for purpose of one the analysis about just we wanted to get figure how many of those voters could be ineligible. And we compared some statistics from the state institution of the US, European countries, etc. And the estimation in total are that 83 to up to 140,000 of the voters in Montenegro could be ineligible due to permanent residency problem status or the citizenship.
Okay. Thank you, Zlatko, and especially thank you for making this point that Cyril was also making, that a lot of the causes of the problems that we have are partially also not only coming from the administrative side and not only coming from the intention of fraud, but also because of the patterns of registration of residences that have other sources. So let's move to another round of questions, and then I would like you to actually be slightly more focused in your answers because we don't have much time. So pick one point that you would like to make, and this is about what we can do to prevent these attempts of electoral engineering. So I will again first start with Cyril. So what control mechanisms do we have? We are talking about mostly civil society organizations here, but not necessarily. and how much the transparency of electoral registries can help in preventing or making these abuses more difficult.
Thank you, Vujo. In Africa, we said that Dario walked on my tongue. He spoke about sanctions, which is the first point. It's mandatory to register, and if you don't, what happens? It's illegal to register twice, 3, 4 times. And if you don't, what happens? First of all, legal provisions. It's a debate we have with a lot of electoral commissions. Do you have legal provisions for that? But the most important, do you implement your legal provisions? I'll give you 2 cases. The case of Congo. For the last elections, they were fed up with duplicates. Every evening on TV, they organized a brigade, electoral brigade. Every evening on TV, you had arrestations of people frauding during the voter registration process. And during election days, every evening you had images of people leaving the polling station like that, because they registered twice. Of course, they didn't sanction all the people of the country who registered twice, because we speak about 6 million people, so it will be complicated. But it's to give the example and to show that it's illegal. Yes, it's illegal. If it's illegal, you have sanctions, and you have to implement them. Second, one other sanction possibility is France. France has an excellent sanction solution. It's money. It's money. France is the only country where they have financial sanctions if you don't follow the rules for registration or for voting process. It's, I was working there, so I pretty well know, but it's a finance control and political parties financing control commission, which impose financial sanction as soon as you have been condemned for any violation for registration or for voting. It's as simple as that. So you lose a lot of money. Remember Nicolas Sarkozy crying for his 12 million not being reimbursed. Second of all is deduplication system. Yes, of course, biometry is here. Many countries are using AFIS, which is automated fingerprint system for deduplication. Some countries, because it's more expensive, to be honest, it's very expensive, is ABIS, is biometric identification system with the iris. You don't need to have modern system, you just need a photo of the voter. So then you can work on the iris, and it works very well, but it costs a lot, and you need an adjudication system, because you cannot delete people just because the system says they are duplicates. You need to adjudicate them. You need to have a system to delete them. On E-Day, many countries are working on systems to control and avoid duplicates on E-Day. I take the example of Ivory Coast or Brazil. They have a system, you know, to check every voter when you enter the voter registration, the polling station. You have to put your finger as a control to access to the vote. If you already voted somewhere, you cannot go and vote again, because you were already flagged into the system. It's quite well working in Brazil, in Ivory Coast. Even after 3 elections, it's a mess, because you need 2 hours to access the polling station. It's very complicated, but they are working on this because they want to control that. And finally, it's transparency, as you said, Vujo, is very important. Transparency and capability to a legal remedy. It means that on election day, you are observers, right? But where are your political parties? Political parties should be able to flag irregularities and to complain about this. The problem is that we mainly have in many countries problem of transparency. Do political parties have access to the polling station data in every polling station? Do they have a system for collecting it? And do they have the time to complain? I'll give you one last example, and I will then shut my mouth. Again, Congo. In 2018 election, all political parties came to me because we had a training about how to organize their compiling system of frauds and then complaining. I'll give you this example because they came to my office, we had long discussions with everyone, and so they structured their system, sending by SMS, a photo, whatever. 2 problems. First problem, they had in the law 24 hours to provide all evidences to the Constitutional Court. 24 hours to provide evidences on a territory big as Europe. with 100 kilometers of roads, I can let you imagine how easy it is. Second of all, the government decided to shut down internet for the next 2 or 3 days after election because they didn't want to have, reactions, demonstrations in the streets. So they did shut internet. How do you gather evidences and go for a legal remedy if you cannot communicate with people? It's as simple as that. It's very technical, it's very simple, but time for legal remedy, time for proofs, transparency is also important. If you want to challenge it and to stop it, you need to have this time for complaining.
Thank you, Cyril. Especially for giving us ideas on shutting down the internet.
No?
But no, seriously. There's also talk about election brigades. I think somebody was taking notes here. This is interesting. So let's move to Dario. I mean, you already talked about what you were doing at the election day. But how else can you, as a civil society organization, try to make these kind of electoral frauds more difficult for those who want to commit them?
Yeah. So I truly think that there is a solution to any problem, and I don't think that there is $1 million questions. If we have determined people who are willing to do something and the resources, which is basically people, time, and money, we can do progress. And I think that Bosnia and Herzegovina, however this sounds strange, is on the right track, and I will try to explain that. Especially in the last 2 years, many things happened. We are completely changed status quo, which was there for 12 years, especially regarding the elections. So I would repeat what Cyril said. I always recall this. We have this high representative in one of the most complex political systems worldwide. He's more or less, to simplify, something closest to God in the tangible, physical sense, because he's stronger the parliament, stronger the institutions. He can dismiss politicians, make laws, and change laws. Yeah. So when the previous one was leaving the country and the new one was coming, he said to him 3 top priorities. He said, do only these 3 things. Yeah. Rule of law, and rule of law. And I'm coming back that there must be consequences for your doing, as there is in life. How to come to that, we can discuss. I've always joked about this group of intouchables. Educate them, give them the best support worldwide of the prosecutors, pay them if it's needed, to get the best possible salaries. And it was somehow naive, but it actually does give. I hope nobody sees him. Yeah? It gives results because something that was unimaginable 5 years before, we have now that in the country one of the prime ministers of one entity is in prison, one of the presidents and another entity is under the criminal charges currently in court. So there are certain things when you have the individuals, because individuals did produce many changes in the prosecution, even when I'm not a judiciary expert, from Falcone in Italy in 90s to this guy in Brazil in 2000s, and Kovaci in Romania, current European key prosecutor in this. So rule of law is the first thing I think that we should pressurize and work on. Second is the oversight, and it is not only it is citizens oversight. First of all, I would like to see as much as active citizens, including formal groups, but also oversight from the civil society and oversight from the international community. I think they still have pretty strong role in Bosnia and Herzegovina, even formal constitutional role, but in the whole Western Balkans. Because what is shown so far, as long as we leave the politicians for 1 minute without watching carefully on them, everything goes backward. Democracy backsliding, and all things go in the opposite direction. And third is the simple solutions, which are more technical solutions, but give results. You mentioned how we prevented voting by post frauds. It was simple because CC decided to introduce something that we advocated and talked about for a long period of years, like a proof of residence in the country, foreign country, where you need to send the ballots. Yeah? Immediately, the number of people who are applying to vote by post dropped for 2.5 times in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and even less number voted of them. So what about this. For example, if we speak about migration, voters list problems, blah, 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 the best solution for the voters list from our perspective, our context, is the electronic voter identification. And we had piloting of these in more than 300 polling stations. And it shows us that the results are obvious. Yeah? We had an accurate identification, and no matter how many people you have at the voters list, no one of them can vote in that particular moment, especially if you have fingerprint technology. Yeah, because if you have biometric identification, you can still come with 20 ID cards, but it's a bit harder to cut someone's finger, yeah, than go out to vote, yeah. So we had this, and it gave results. But why is voter identification even more important than preventing dead people voting, double voting? So it is important because of the happenings after 7 p.m. You cannot misuse unused ballot anymore and overpump someone votes, yeah. Do ballot stuffing or voting instead of another. So I think this is one issue. Second issue, we had the scanners, ballot scanners being piloted also. So we literally have, at 165 polling stations, it's 145 actually, the photos of all ballots, photographs of all ballots. And you can go and do by-election forensics and determine the real results. 45 seconds took, in average, to scan both ballots. I think 45 seconds are more democracy in my country, yeah? If it's a bit longer process. 92 seconds took us to transfer results for 2 levels of government with the preferential voting. Usually, it takes us still. We had elections 6th October. If we do it manually, we still have some polling stations not being counted properly and recounting weighted or already done. Yeah, so I think there is also these technical solutions, and I think it is combination. So if I have to summarize, rule of law, civil oversight, and simple solutions which do produce effects.
Exactly. Thank you. I would turn to Zlatko now. Zlatko, you recently launched an initiative for regional cross-checking of voter registry data in the Western Balkans. And can you tell us about the goals and the outcomes of this initiative, and how could it contribute, in your view, to making electoral engineering more difficult?
Thank you for raising this issue. Yes, Temi initiated one proposal that was supported by the colleagues from the CETA and CESIS from Serbia, and it was about to share data between the Western Balkan country in order to have more accurate voter registry. It is very important to understand, for those who are not familiar with this region, that being part of the Yugoslavia once, we also using the same kind of the modeling, designing the personal identification number. So what does it mean? That the same type of the number is used in all countries, and each of the individual has its personal identification number that could be compared. So my personal number, there is no double number in Serbia. It is a unique number in all countries. So, for example, if you have that personal number, there are no 2 people that could have the same number, at least in the post-Yugoslav countries. I'm talking now about Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro. It is not possible to use. So it would be very easy if there is a political will in the Western Balkans, as we all 6 countries want to join the EU. And when we are going to become the EU member countries, our citizens will have right to vote not only on national and local election, but also on election electing the members of the European Parliament. In the EU, there is a right. It is very important when you are European citizens, the permanent residency. Why? Based on the permanent residence, you have right to choose representatives of that country where you are residing. So, for example, Italian citizens living in the Berlin, having the permanent residency there, is voting on the European election for representatives of the Germany in the European Parliament. Not of Italy. He votes electing on national election in Italy based on Italian citizenship. But for example, if that Italian citizen this Italian citizen lives in the Berlin, he's also voting for local election in Berlin. So actually from the European citizenship, they are generating two rights: to vote based on the permanent residency, electing the representative of the country of the residents in the European Parliament, but also on the local elections. So if we know that, let's then prepare for that moment. Let's do it some kind of the agreement. We are proposing agreement on free and fair election in the Western Balkans that could be signed within the Berlin process, within the European Cooperation Council, with the support and the sponsorship of the European Union, so that we can work in order to avoid any possibility of abuse. Technically, it wouldn't be so difficult if there is a political will. For example, when we were living in the same country, Yugoslavia, in 90s, if you wanted to change the permanent residency and, for example, to register another municipality, you needed to bring the document that you inform your authorities in the previous permanent residency location that it is changed, you know. So there is a lot of we are proposing the different kind in that declaration and the document. But it is very important to stop to this migration of the voters in order to affect the final outcome of election. Without sharing data between the voter registry of these countries, we would not be able to stop this. And I think that a lot of the stakeholders are quite nervous about the integrity of the electoral process in our countries. What we were talking about, this migration of the voter, is not only the problem Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro. It is between Kosovo, Albania, western part of the North Macedonia, you know. So when there is let's say, the same electorate of the same nationality or the same language using, we have this kind of the problems. So there are possible ways to solve it. And we had the conversation with the German diplomats, you know. There was at the beginning some interest, but they believe that's what they formed, that this initiative is much more for a European Parliament and the Regional Cooperation Council. But I think that all stakeholders, all those who are interested in the integrity of electoral process should support these kinds of the ideas in order to avoid the situation of that this could not be any more controlled, because elections are, if we allow this to become a new habit, new normality, then why to have elections? Why to have elections if one actor or few actors can control the process and the final outcome, not depending on what voters think and decide.
Thank you, Zlatko, for that, and let's see how it goes on. And this is probably one of the initiatives whose time is yet to come. And let me give the floor back to Zsuzsanna. So we talked from the perspective of domestic observers a lot. Domestic observation is not a global norm as international observation is. And in Hungary, the work of domestic observers is especially difficult, yet you manage to do amazing job. So my question is, how do you manage?
Well, so as you said, that there is no domestic observation in a sense that we go to the polling stations. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to raise awareness to things. So that's what we can do. If we see that there is election engineering, there is a huge election fraud, then we're trying to raise awareness and tell people who are not always looking at legal regulations that this is what is happening to you and this means this and this. So that's one of the things. And the other, what I just said, that we provide legal aid as much as we can. Of course, we have some limits due to the Hungarian system. And one more thing I wanted to tell you all is about the recently established Hungarian Sovereignty Defense Office, what we have in Hungary, as a frightening example. In 2024, this office was set up in defense of the Hungarian sovereignty. A long communication campaign was had before that, and now it started its work, so-called work. it says to be reporting and mapping the perceived threats on Hungary's national sovereignty. And they are aiming at identifying those who are serving foreign interest. Sounds very sketchy, who are serving foreign interests. So as you can hear, or might hear, that this is a propaganda tool, which is now an office, a sovereignty defense office. I started work with monitoring the Transparency International Hungary, and also a media outlet, Átlátszó, which is translated as transparency. So those institutions who are trying to monitor corruptions, which is also made by the Hungarian government, but anyone else as well. So actually this office is conducting examination, asking for data, and doing a report, which is not a strong and powerful organization, not a powerful mandate for them. But also, at the same time, the scope of what they can do is very unidentified, undefined, and we don't know yet what they are doing. But what we see that they have a chilling effect on the smaller NGOs in Hungary, because they are afraid to do what they usually did, because they are afraid that they will get examined by the Hungarian Sovereignty Office. And the other thing is what they are trying to do, and we hope that they will not manage to do, that they are trying to turn the citizens against these NGOs. Because if we say something and the government propaganda says that they shall not believe what we are saying because we are foreign agents and our observations are in foreign interests, then what we do as election observers from a distance is also it gets way harder to do our work. So what we are trying to do is, yet again, to raise awareness to this one as well, that you shall not believe what the Hungarian Sovereignty Office does, and you shall check on those things, what the Hungarian government does, because it's our work to raise awareness to these things, and the change will come when a political change will come. And up until then, we try our best. So,
thank you a lot for sharing this with us. This is definitely something that we all need to think about and have in our mind. So thank you all for participating. Thank you, Zlatko, for finding the time to join us online. Thank you for great contributions. I think we are way over our scheduled time, so I think that doesn't leave us much time for Q&A. But thank you all for being here, and I give floor back to you.